Good evening. My name is Sue Smerrick. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of the Ann Arbor area. I welcome you to tonight's forum featuring candidates for the Michigan House of Representatives, District 53. The candidates will be on the ballot on the Tuesday, November 6th election. We are broadcasting this evening from the studios of CTN Ann Arbor. The League of Women Voters is pleased to be sponsoring this forum. We are a nonpartisan civic organization that encourages informed and active participation of all citizens in government. The League works to increase understanding of major policy issues and seeks to strengthen and broaden knowledge about our form of government and democracy. While the League does not support candidates or parties, we do take stands on issues we have studied. One of the League's most important goals is to assist voters in making informed decisions at the polls, and thus we bring you tonight's forum. Volunteers from the Ann Arbor League are facilitating tonight's forum. Our moderator this evening is Jeff Smerrick, who will explain the process from here. Jeff?
Thank you, Sue, and thank you for joining us. You're good citizens. It's not my honor now to introduce the two candidates for the Michigan House of Representatives from District 53, Mr. Yusuf Rabi and Ms. Jean Holland. Thank you, candidates. The forum this evening will have this format. Each candidate will have an opening statement of up to 1 minute. Each candidate will have a closing statement of up to 90 seconds. In between, the moderator will ask the questions which came from the Ann Arbor community. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to a question. At appropriate times, the timers will hold up their paddles with the amount of time remaining, and then finally a stop sign. Candidates, please stop when indicated so that all can have an equal opportunity to participate. The order of speaking today was determined by agreement before we began. Opening first will be Yusuf Rabi, who will also close first. Our timers are League members Maggie Conger and Miriam Shaw. We're ready for your opening statement, Mr. Rabi.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me here, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum. It's awesome that you've been a part of this community, hosting these opportunities for citizens to get to know their candidates for so many years. So my name is Yusuf Rabi, and I have served in the capacity of state representative here in the 53rd District for the last term, for the last 2 years. And before that, I had the honor of serving as the county commissioner for Washtenaw County for much of the 53rd District in Ann Arbor. I got to serve in that capacity for 6 years, and as such, was proud to work with citizens all over Washtenaw County to push for the same things that I'm now pushing for as a state representative. As a state representative, I've been pushing to make our schools work better. We need to increase funding for public education. We need to fight for our environment, make sure that everybody in Michigan can drink clean water and breathe clean air. We need to make sure that we have equity in our state, both pay equity and make sure that we're fighting for our LGBT community. And lastly, we need to make sure that we have an economy that works for everybody, not just those at the very top, which is why I introduced my single-payer health care plan for Michigan, which I look forward to talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rabi. And now, Ms. Holland, we're ready for your opening statement.
Thank you, League of Women Voters, for organizing this forum. My name is Jean Holland. I've lived in Ann Arbor since 1965. I attended Ann Arbor High, University of Michigan, got married, had a son, and then became a single mother. I then attended EMU on a government grant and got my degree in business computer systems. After 20 years of IT work, I started a consulting business. I chose to go on an adventure and went to Malaysia to take my skills there. I taught Muslim women how to put their wares and put them forth on the internet. I was in Kuala Lumpur on 9/11 and came home because of the unrest. I now work primarily with retailers. I listen and turn what I hear into action.
Thank you, Ms. Holland. And now, candidates, we're ready for the questions. First question goes to you, Mr. Rabi. In Michigan, money has been diverted from our K through 12 public schools, even as the educational performance of our public schools has been declining. Meanwhile, funding for higher education has also declined, making college education ever more costly and inaccessible. What are your solutions for improving the quality of education in Michigan?
Great. So that's a wonderful question. I actually have the honor of serving on the House Appropriations Committee, and as such, I serve on the subcommittee for community colleges and the subcommittee for higher education. So I get a front row seat to see what has been done over the last few years to erode our public school funding. I'm going to start talking about K through 12. So we actually get a fair amount of money into our K through 12 school aid fund. Unfortunately, over the last few years under Republican leadership, that money has been diverted to other general fund obligations. That money, that shell game that's been going on in Lansing has to end. And as a representative, as a member of the Community Colleges Committee, I actually introduced an amendment to the budget that would have ended the diversion of community colleges, of dollars for community colleges that should have been going to higher education. Community colleges and higher ed, both very important obligations. Those should be funded out of the general fund, not out of the school aid. Those dollars should not come out of our public schools. The other piece that I'll talk about too is the fact that it seems like every other week there's another tax break for private airplane parts, for all these things, sales tax breaks that the legislature is voting on. I've consistently voted against the vast majority of those because they take away millions of dollars from our schools and erode our ability to fund K through 12 education in Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Robbie. Ms. Holland, same question to you.
I also agree that funds should not be diverted from the general school fund. If in fact there was too much money there, then it could be put to better use, improving what we do have in our school system. I strongly support charter schools. I strongly support a track method so that kids with special talents or interests can be allowed to progress at their own rate and to follow their dreams, so to speak. I know that in this town it's hard to imagine that a four-year degree isn't what you should be striving for, but the fact of the matter is it's not for everyone. I believe that our school funds should help develop those special talents so that we're not all on the same, we're not all guided on the same plane, that it's not a common denominator, it's what you can achieve and how high can you go independently.
Thank you, Ms. Holland. And we're going to go to you again for the next question, which relates to infrastructure. Michigan has some of the most deteriorated infrastructure in the country, particularly our roads. Yet only limited funds have been directed at infrastructure, even though this would create jobs and increase economic development. What are the best approaches for improving Michigan's infrastructure? Ms. Holland?
The infrastructure regarding our electrical grid, our roads and highways and bridges, these are all absolutely things that everyone wants to have in good repair and in good working order. We want our safe highways. We want good communication. None of that can happen. Commerce can't happen. Nothing can happen without being able to get from point A to point B. If anything, I think more funds should be diverted from wherever it can be found to improve our roads and our systems of transportation.
Thank you, Ms. Holland. Mr. Robbie, to you, same question.
Great. So infrastructure in our state has been dramatically underfunded for years. And unfortunately, a lot of that comes from the fact that we underfund our local governments. And that's done through the cutting back of revenue sharing and the failure of Lansing to actually fund the promises that it's made to fund our counties and our cities. But something that I want to focus on now is the fact that we actually, the state of Michigan, poisoned people in Flint and continue to underfund and push to the side our obligations when it comes to water infrastructure through this state. We have PFAS contaminating the Huron River. There are people in Detroit, schools in Detroit, that can't use the water that's coming out of their taps. It's unacceptable that we continue to live in a state that is surrounded by fresh water, and yet there's not enough for people to drink. I proposed a piece of legislation that actually says to the Nestle, who's now bottling water for basically free in Michigan, this bill would actually make them pay a per bottle fee. That money would go into a revolving fund that would actually help to pay for infrastructure improvement in places like Flint. So I've actually introduced that bill, and I've actually made that as an amendment to the state budget. It failed, but I attempted to make it. And so that is this concrete way that we can actually help to move our state in the right direction, to take Nestle, that's bottling our water for free, and actually make them pay a little bit of something so that we can use that money to make sure that people in Flint can drink clean water.
Thank you, Mr. Robbie. And you get the next question, which relates to the environment as it happens. Michigan is experiencing historic threats to our environment. There are many examples: the Flint water crisis, the Gelman 1,4 dioxane plume in Ann Arbor, the contamination of the Kalamazoo River, contaminated water in the Detroit schools, PFAS in our groundwater, the risk of a massive oil spill which would destroy much of Lake Michigan from the deteriorated line number 5 running under the Mackinac Bridge. What are your priorities and strategies for protecting Michigan's waters? What changes should we make to Michigan law?
So unfortunately, Michigan has some very bad laws when it comes to the environment. We once had a law on the books that said that if you pollute a site, you have to clean it up. It makes sense, right? That's what our parents taught us when we were kids. If we make a mess in our room, we got to clean it up. But unfortunately in Michigan, that's not the case. Polluters can pollute a site and have no responsibility around it. That's why the first bill that I introduced when I came to Lansing in 2017 was called the Polluter Pay Bill, to make sure that polluters in Michigan have to pay for the messes that they make. Now, they shouldn't be making them in the first place, but if they do, they need to be on the hook to pay for it. When it comes to the 1,4 dioxane plume in Ann Arbor, that should hold true for the Paul Gelman Corporation, which has polluted our groundwater and yet refuses to remediate the problem. We have some real problems, and there are some concrete solutions out there. When it comes to Line 5, I introduced the House resolution to call for the Governor and the Attorney General to immediately shut down Line 5. I was proud to introduce that resolution, and I was proud to be joined by environmental organizations and tribal nations across this state to push for that. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of work to do, and I've also introduced legislation around pipeline safety to make sure that our pipelines in Michigan, that those that are operating, that there are certain restrictions on what they can do, and to make sure that they're protective of public health and safety and the general welfare of the people of the state of Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Robbie. Ms. Holland, same question to you.
I also agree that if you pollute, you should be the person who is responsible to clean it up. It's just completely irresponsible that someone would do that or could get away with that and not have to clean it up. The particulars on the Gelman plume is that it's been in court for a long time. Nothing seems to be happening. I really think we need to act on it now, because every day it gets worse and worse and worse. I mean, all we really can do in our area is monitor the water and hope for the best. There's an opportunity, I think, to engage with the federal government through the EPA Superfund to get this cleaned up. And I know that that would kind of circumvent the legal proceedings that are going on right now with Gelman, but it would get it done. We really need to get it done, and there's no excuse for waiting. Regarding the other water monitoring activities, as I said, Ann Arbor as a community is too small really to make those cleanups. The funding for these kinds of things has to come from the state or the federal government. Our water is our most precious resource. We have 20% of the world's fresh water right here in Michigan, and we have to be stewards of it.
Thank you, Ms. Holland. And the next question goes back to you again, relating to health care. Congress has repeatedly attempted to repeal the Affordable Care Act, yet has been unable to stabilize the health care system. What do you think are the best approaches for improving access and affordability to health care? What should the legislature do to improve access and affordability of health care in Michigan?
I strongly support centralized or subsidized community wellness as opposed to reacting to an illness. I think that we need to spend more money on wellness and fitness activities. I do not support free medical care for people who are in this country illegally. I would work diligently to reduce the cost of health care. A visit to the doctor for a checkup should not cost more than $100 or even more now with our current system. I believe that part of the reason the cost is so high is because of the drug companies taking advantage of a very closed audience and the fact that they own these patents and they can sell it for whatever it's worth. Those kinds of things make our healthcare escalate way beyond what an average person could afford. I don't think everyone needs health insurance. I think everyone needs health care, but I do not think everyone needs health insurance. I would never turn away anyone in need from a hospital. I don't care if they're illegal or legal. You have to take care of them. That's the human thing to do. But there cannot be a no limit for everyone, covering everything.
Thank you, Ms. Holland. And to you, Mr. Robbie, same question.
Thank you for the great question. So we live in the wealthiest nation in the history of humanity. And so to me, it is an unacceptable proposition that families have to choose between getting chemotherapy or going to the doctor and keeping the lights on in their house or being able to keep the heat on in the winter. And yet there are thousands of families across Michigan that have to make that decision every day. That's unacceptable to me, which is why I introduced MyCare, which is the first of its kind bill in Michigan that actually introduces a single-payer universal health care system for everyone in our state. All 10 million Michigan residents would be covered for their physical health, mental health, dental health, and vision, and their prescription drug medication. This would eliminate copays, deductibles, premiums, and would actually reduce the cost of insurance overall in Michigan by close to 20%. This plan I've proposed would actually not really impact doctors at all either. Doctors would basically be compensated the same that they are now under the private health insurance system, and it would reduce duplication in the system as well. So we can reduce costs for taxpayers, we can reduce costs overall for the system, and we can make sure that everybody in the state of Michigan has coverage when they need it. And we can do that through my plan, MyCare, which I introduced in July of this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robbie. And the next question goes back to you again. The League of Women Voters has always advocated for access to voting, for fair processes in creating voting districts, and for accurate information for voters. Please discuss the steps you think we need to take to improve voter access. What is your position on the ballot proposals in Michigan for redistricting and voting rights?
So from day one, when I began as a state representative, the first town hall that I had was about redistricting. The issue of gerrymandering is number one, in my opinion. We do not have fair districts in the state. We have people that are going to the ballot and voting, and unfortunately their vote is not heard and not counted. We need to make sure that the process for drawing districts in Michigan is nonpartisan, which is why I support Proposal 2 on the ballot. I also support Proposal 3, which is Promote the Vote, which would actually enshrine some of the things that I've always pushed for. It's on my website as well, and has been on my website for years in terms of what I support. For no reason absentee voting, to make sure that people can get an absentee ballot and vote. Voter registration, making sure that, that voters can actually go to the polls and register to vote up until the election day. Making sure that our service members overseas have access to voting, because right now there are so many barriers to our service members overseas for them to actually have their voices heard, which is why I strongly support Proposal 3, Promote the Vote. as well as Proposal 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robbie. Ms. Holland, same question to you.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Absolutely. It relates to voting integrity. The League of Women Voters has always advocated for access to voting, for fair processes in creating voting districts, and accurate information for voters. Please give us the steps you think need to be taken to improve voter access in Michigan, and what's your position on the ballot proposals in Michigan for redistricting and voting rights?
For a long time, I've been in favor of making Election Day a holiday where most businesses would be closed, and that would allow people to go vote. I also think that providing transportation for folks who can't make it to the polls, and also expanding absentee voter registration, this would help a great deal. Regarding redistricting, it's absolutely essential that citizens, independent, nonpartisan citizens, first come up with a set of rules by which redistricting can happen, and number two, make it happen. Right now, I'm not even certain there's a clear definition of how a district should be drawn. And it's a matter of opinion and political grouping that is making it happen. I don't agree with the gerrymandering and the way our districts are carved up to suit one segment or another. But I also don't know that there's a clear understanding as to how the districts should be apportioned. So once that's determined, we can assign the task to our independent group and have them redraw those lines.
Thank you, Ms. Holland. And the next question goes back to you again. Since the 2008-2009 recession, the economy has improved and unemployment has declined. However, the overwhelming portion of the recovery has gone to Michigan citizens who own tradable assets, especially stocks. Most Michigan citizens who are dependent on savings or on income from a weekly paycheck have yet to see any significant recovery. What strategies do you think are necessary to bring economic benefits to all citizens of Michigan?
I think income tax for retirement income should be eliminated if there is tax on that income. I believe that there should be, in fact, to come right down to it, I don't believe in an income tax, period. I think if you earn $1, it's your dollar. And there's other ways to get money to the government in a fashion that makes sure the people paying are the people receiving the services. I believe in property tax breaks for the elderly and for people who cannot or are not able to work. In that respect, I think they could be helped. Now, as far as the recovery, I disagree. I'm in business. I see what's happening in the retail sector, and it's going great guns. And so I think there is a recovery there is a recovery happening that maybe you haven't seen yet. But my retailers are seeing incredible gains, and that can only help the general economy and anyone who has to pay taxes in the first place.
Thank you, Ms. Holland. Same question to you, Mr. Robbie.
It's a wonderful question. I appreciate you asking it. I fully agree that while the economy is recovering for some, and while the unemployment rate is pretty low, that unfortunately is no indication of where many Michigan residents are right now. Just because you have a job doesn't mean you're making enough money to pay the bills. And unfortunately, just because the unemployment rate is low doesn't mean that every Michigan resident is able to get ahead. I've traveled all over the state over the last 2 years, and I've seen what it's like to live in different parts of our state. People are struggling. They're struggling to pay the bills. They're struggling to keep the lights on. And it is unacceptable, in my opinion, that this state continues to act as if the recovery is working. And when we hear our governor say we're on track, everything's going better, it's almost insulting to me having seen the living conditions of some of our fellow Michiganders and some of the things that they go through. I believe that we need to increase the minimum wage in our state. We need to make sure that everybody in Michigan gets paid a fair wage. We also need to reinstate the state's prevailing wage law to make sure that our laborers in Michigan, working on our highways and building our government buildings, are getting paid a fair wage. And unfortunately, the Republicans in Lansing repealed that law not too long ago. There's so much that we can do to make sure that working people in Michigan get a fair shake. And unfortunately, right now, for the last 8 years of Republican leadership in Lansing, we've only moved the ball in the wrong direction. Thank you for asking that question.
Thank you, Mr. Robbie, and thank you, candidates, for your wonderful answers. This brings us now to our closing statements. We're ready for your closing statement, Mr. Robbie.
Wonderful. And thank you again to the League of Women Voters for having this forum. It is so important as part of a democratic process to have an opportunity for citizens to be able to see what the candidates are saying. I also want to thank my opponent for being willing to run. It's important in a democracy, too, to have that opportunity to vet different ideas. So I want to thank her for being brave enough to put her name on the ballot and to run for office. So I'm running again on a platform of fighting again for our environment, making sure that people can breathe clean air and drink clean water in our state. I want to fight to make sure that our schools get the funding that they deserve and the funding that they need, make sure our teachers are supported. I want to make sure that our economy works for everybody in Michigan, not just for the top 1%. And lastly, I want to make sure that we have equity in our state. Not just pay equity, but also to make sure that we have equity when it comes to our LGBT community, which we haven't updated the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act in far too long, to make sure that it creates a system where we have equity in the state of Michigan. My name is Yusuf Rabhi. You can find my website at voterabhi.com and find information about my candidacy there. I want to thank you so much again for having this forum and for the opportunity to address the citizens of our community.
Thank you, Mr. Robbie. And now, Ms. Holland, your closing statement, please.
And thank you again, League of Women Voters, for having this forum. There's 3 questions I will ask for every issue that's brought to me. Can we afford it? Has it worked in the past? And did it improve anything? Those are 3 very critical questions that have to be evaluated before I will vote in favor of whatever the issue is. I believe in self-reliance, not dependence. I believe that a responsible adult should be able to conduct life as that person sees fit, making choices, but also taking responsibility for actions. I believe in personal achievement and the rewards that come from that. I believe that education and training is the key to success. In my perfect world, junior college would be free to anyone who wanted to learn. Education of our citizens should be a top priority. I believe we should protect our environment to keep it intact for the next generation. I believe that taxes paid to the government should be in exchange for services that cannot be performed by an individual. I believe in the rule of law. I believe in a fair playing field and telling the truth. I understand the responsibility that is inherent as a representative of such a diverse community. I'll take your voice with me to Lansing and make you heard.
Thank you, Ms. Holland, and thank you, candidates. Sue?
Thank you, candidates, for participating in tonight's forum. To those who contributed questions and to CDN for making this forum possible. These forums will be rebroadcast on Channel 19 a number of times between now and the election and are available on demand for streaming on your computer or smartphone. Go to the League of Women Voters website, lwvannarbor.org. That's lwvannarbor.org, and look for the link to the programs. Encourage your friends and fellow residents to watch these forums as well. For additional balanced and nonpartisan information on candidates and ballot issues, you can go to vote411.org. That's vote.411.org and enter your address. There you will find information on the candidates and ballot proposals that appear on your ballot. And be sure to vote on November 6th. Good night.
you.